My name is Janice Carter. I'm 55 years old. At 10:17 on a Wednesday morning in a county courthouse that smelled like old carpet, coffee, and other people's ruined marriages, my husband looked at the judge and said, "Janice never really worked." Not quietly, not accidentally, not in anger, where truth sometimes gets bruised by emotion. He said it calmly, clearly, like a man placing a clean glass on a table. My attorney, Helen Park, turned her head very slightly toward me. Not much. Just enough for me to know she had heard the same thing I had heard. Across the aisle, my husband of 31 years, Richard Carter, sat in a Navy suit I had picked out for him 6 years earlier before a supplier dinner in Chicago. His silver hair was combed back. His face was serious in that practiced way he used with bankers, clients, inspectors, and now a judge. His attorney had asked, "Mr. Carter, can you describe your wife's role in the business?" Richard folded his hands. "She helped sometimes," he said. "Answered phones now and then, ran errands. But she was never an employee in the real sense. Carter Custom Millwork was my company. I built it." Then came the sentence. "Janice never really worked." A few people in the back of the courtroom shifted. I sat very still. My wedding ring was no longer on my finger, but the pale groove remained, a thin oval witness to 3 decades of standing beside a man who had just erased me in 8 words. Never really worked. I thought of the first office we had, a converted storage room behind the shop, where I used a folding table as a desk and kept invoices in shoeboxes because we could not afford filing cabinets yet. Never really worked. I thought of the winter. I brought our daughter's portable crib to the shop because payroll was due, Richard was at a job site, and 3 employees needed checks before Christmas. Never really worked. I thought of vendor calls, late invoices, client contracts, bid packets, tax filings, insurance audits, safety forms, bank meetings, showroom appointments, scheduling, collections, warranty complaints, payroll corrections, supplier disputes, and the thousands of small decisions that turned Carter Custom Millwork from a 2-man cabinet shop into a regional business with 18 employees, commercial contracts, and a valuation Richard suddenly wanted to define without me. Never really worked. Richard looked at the judge with sorrowful patience. "She was my wife," he said. "I supported her. I don't want to be unfair, but she's trying to claim half of something she didn't build." Something in me went perfectly quiet. Not calm, quiet. There is a difference. Calm is soft. Quiet can be steel cooling in a dark room. The judge, Honorable Marianne Ellis, made a note. My attorney leaned closer. "Ready?" she whispered. I looked down at the banker's box beside my chair. 20 years of payroll records, tax filings, vendor emails, client contracts, bank loan applications, insurance documents, signed change orders, photographs, accountant letters, employee statements. My name, again and again and again, in the places Richard thought women disappeared because no one put them on a business card. I had arrived with 4 binders and 1 banker's box. Richard had arrived with confidence. He did not know the difference yet. What he did not know was that I had kept everything. Not because I expected divorce. Not because I planned revenge. Because for 20 years, I was the woman everyone called. When the numbers didn't match, the delivery was late, the client wanted revisions, the tax form needed correcting, the insurance auditor had questions, or Richard had promised something in a handshake and forgotten to write it down. What Richard did not know was that our accountant had copies of every year I worked off the books, while the company called my labor owner support to avoid payroll taxes and keep loan ratios clean. What he did not know was that vendors had emailed me, not him, when credit terms were extended. What he did not know was that the largest commercial client in our company's history had signed, because I rewrote the bid after Richard missed 3 required compliance attachments. And what he absolutely did not know was that the first document Helen planned to hand the judge was a bank loan application from 2009, signed by Richard himself, listing me as co-founder, operations manager, and essential to company continuity. I heard him say I never worked. Then I opened the first binder. This is that story. Before I tell you how my husband learned that unpaid labor is still labor when the records are kept, Tell me where you are watching or listening from, and what time it is there. I always wonder who hears stories like this while remembering the moment someone tried to erase work they benefited from. And if you connect with stories about women who were dismissed, underestimated, betrayed, and quietly took their power back, like and subscribe to Ultimate Revenge. Some women do not argue in the hallway. Some women hand the judge 20 years of records. I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, in a white house with green shutters, a narrow garage, and a father who believed a person's word mattered only if their paperwork matched it. My father, Frank Mitchell, ran a small appliance repair business out of that garage for 32 years. My mother, Elaine, did the books at the kitchen table. She was not on the sign. She was not on the invoices at first. Customers called and asked for Frank. Salesmen shook Dad's hand and ignored the woman who knew which accounts were overdue, which parts were backordered, and which customer had written 3 bad checks. When I was 14, I asked my mother if it bothered her. She looked over her reading glasses and said, "Of course it bothers me. That's why I keep copies." That sentence became part of my bones. Mom had a metal file cabinet in the basement. Every paid invoice, every bank statement, every tax return, every warranty claim, every handwritten note from customers. She could find anything in under 5 minutes, and my father knew better than to call it clutter. "Your mother remembers where the money went," he used to say. "That's half the business." When Dad died, Mom sold the business for more than anyone expected because she had 30 years of clean records. Men from the bank praised Dad's good management. Mom smiled and said, "Thank you." Later, in the car, she said, "They praised your father, they paid me." I never forgot that. I met Richard Carter when I was 21 and working at a hardware store while finishing community college classes in office administration. He came in wearing jeans, work boots, and sawdust on his shirt, looking for drawer slides and acting as if the world had personally failed him because we were out of one size. "I found a substitute part," he said. "You know hardware?" "I know inventory." He laughed. I did not. He apologized, then came back the next week with coffee and an excuse about cabinet hinges. Richard was 24 then, ambitious, handsome, charming in a rough-edged way. He had big hands, dark hair, and the kind of confidence that can look like destiny when you are young enough not to recognize ego. He wanted to own a custom woodworking shop. He talked about craftsmanship, quality, reputation, doing things right. I admired that. My father had raised me around tools and invoices. I understood the dignity of work done carefully. We married when I was 24. Carter Custom Millwork began in a rented garage 6 months later. Richard and his friend Paul built cabinets. I answered the phone. That was how Richard would describe it later. She answered phones. As if the phone were ornamental. The first call I answered was from a woman named Mrs. Donnelly, who wanted built-in bookshelves and had already called 3 shops that never called her back. I took measurements over the phone, scheduled Richard to visit, wrote down her preferences, followed up with a typed estimate, and reminded Richard twice to bring wood samples. Mrs. Donnelly became our first paid client. She referred 2 neighbors. One of those neighbors owned a small dental practice. The dental practice led to 3 commercial reception desks. But yes, I answered the phone. The symbolic object in this story was a red ledger book. My mother gave it to me when Richard and I opened the shop. It had a hard cover, lined pages, and a ribbon marker. She placed it on our kitchen table and said, "Write everything down until you can afford software, then keep writing the important things down anyway." Richard laughed. "Janice is going to make us official." Mom looked at him. "No, she is going to make you provable." At 24, I thought that was dramatic. At 55, sitting in divorce court, I understood it was prophecy. In the early years, there was no line between marriage and business. We ate dinner at 9. We discussed estimates in bed. I brought invoices to the shop in grocery bags. Richard came home with sawdust in his hair and anxiety in his shoulders. I learned everything because everything needed doing. Accounts payable, accounts receivable, sales tax, vendor setup, scheduling, client intake, purchase orders, insurance, payroll, bank deposits, collections, advertising, employee paperwork, warranty claims, permits, compliance forms, Richard built beautiful things. I built the structure that let him keep building. At first, he knew that. When we landed our first restaurant job, he kissed me in the shop office and said, "I couldn't do this without you." When I negotiated better lumber pricing with Holt Supply, he told everyone Janice saved us 10 grand this year. When our first employee, Miguel, needed help with payroll withholding, Richard sent him to me and said, "She knows all that stuff." She, not employee, not partner. She. It did not bother me at first. We were married. We were building together. We had a daughter, Lily, when I was 28. I worked through pregnancy, took invoices to the hospital, and processed payroll from home 12 days after a C-section because Richard could not remember the overtime calculation for 2 employees. People called me dedicated. I thought they meant it kindly. Then came our son, Ben, 3 years later. By then, the company had 6 employees and a real shop. I did school pickup, office work, billing, tax prep, vendor calls, and customer communication. Richard worked long hours too. I will not pretend he did not. He was talented. He could sketch a cabinet design on a scrap of plywood and make a client see their dream kitchen. He knew wood, he knew measurements. He knew how to lead men on a job site. But he did not know how to keep the business solvent. I did. The first major cash crisis came in 2003, when a hotel renovation delayed payment for 90 days and we had payroll due on Friday. Richard panicked. He wanted to yell at the project manager. I pulled contracts, found the payment clause, documented completed milestones, sent a formal notice, and negotiated partial release. Payroll cleared, Richard told the employees, had to shake the tree a little. I was in the office with a fax confirmation in my hand. No one saw. That became a pattern. I did the quiet work. Richard told the loud story. In 2006, we moved into a larger shop with a small showroom. The bank required financial statements, projections, client history, accounts receivable aging, equipment inventory, and a business plan. Richard said he would handle, quote, the vision. I wrote the plan. 42 pages. Market overview, revenue history, growth projections, risk management, client diversification, vendor credit, staffing needs. At the bank meeting, Richard presented it as our plan, then answered the first question wrong. The loan officer asked about seasonal cash flow. Richard looked at me. I answered. Then the next question. And the next. By the end, the loan officer was speaking mostly to me. On the application, he wrote my role as operations manager. Richard signed it. He forgot that later. I did not. The business grew. So did Richard's public image. Carter Custom Millwork became known for high-end residential work and small commercial interiors. Lawyers, offices, medical clinics, restaurants, custom kitchens, built-ins, reception desks, conference room cabinetry. We sponsored Little League teams. We attended chamber events. Richard joined the Rotary Club. He shook hands. He gave speeches about craftsmanship and family values. I stayed in the office. That was not an accident. He began saying things like, Janice doesn't like the spotlight. That was partly true. I did not need applause. But I did need acknowledgement. When people asked what I did, I said, I manage operations for our company. Richard said, she keeps me organized. Those are not the same sentence. Around 2011, the off-the-books issue became more serious. Our accountant, George Bell, told us we should formalize my compensation. I had taken small draws sometimes, but not consistent payroll. Richard argued that because we filed jointly and owned marital assets, it did not matter. George said, it matters for Social Security, retirement contributions, employment records, and valuation later. Richard waved him off. We're not getting divorced. I remember exactly where I was sitting, at the edge of George's conference table holding a folder of quarterly tax estimates. I said, it still seems cleaner to put me on payroll. Richard looked at me. Why, you want a paycheck from your own husband? The words embarrassed me. That was their purpose. George cleared his throat. It's not about permission. It's about documenting labor. Richard laughed. Janice documents everything. Yes. I did. But I let the payroll issue slide because our marriage was good enough then, or I wanted to believe it was. The company needed cash. The kids needed braces. We were expanding. Richard said we would fix it later. Later is where women's security goes to die. Still, I kept records. Every email, every contract, every client communication, every vendor negotiation, every bank document with my name, every handwritten note from Richard asking me to fix this, call them, handle payroll, clean up bid, send contract, deal with George, collect from Miller, schedule install, update pricing, smooth over client. In 2014, I created an email folder called Proof of Work, not because I planned divorce, because something in me had begun to notice the erasure. That was the year Richard gave an interview to a local business magazine. The article headline was, "Craftsman Turns Garage Dream into Regional Success." The photo showed Richard standing in the showroom with his arms crossed, smiling proudly in front of a wall of cabinet samples I had organized by finish and price tier. The article mentioned his supportive wife, Janice. Supportive, not co-founder, not operations manager, not business partner. Supportive wife. When I told him it hurt me, he said, "It's just an article." I said, "It erased my work." He sighed. "Do we have to make everything about feelings?" I wanted to say, "No, Richard, we can make it about facts." Instead, I went to the office the next morning and saved the email thread, where the journalist had asked me for revenue numbers, employee counts, and company history, because Richard had told her, "Janice has all that." Proof of Work. By 2018, the business was worth real money. We had 18 employees, a solid commercial book, and equipment assets. Lily was in college. Ben was finishing high school. Richard had become more polished, more distant, and more convinced of his own legend. He liked being called founder. He liked being called owner. He liked clients saying, "Richard, you built something amazing." I would stand beside him and smile. At home, things had cooled. Not one dramatic affair then. Not yet. Just distance. He worked late more often. He traveled to supplier conferences I used to attend with him, then said it made more sense for me to stay back and, quote, keep the shop running. He bought nicer suits. He started going to the gym. He corrected me in front of employees. Small things at first. "Janice, I've got it. Don't overwhelm them with details. Let's not get too technical." Technical. The word men use for facts they do not want said aloud. Then came Marissa. She was a sales consultant hired in 2020 to help expand our commercial client base. 39, divorced, stylish, energetic, and very impressed with Richard. I trained her on our pricing structure, contract process, vendor categories, and client database. She called me a lifesaver for 3 months. Then she began traveling with Richard to client meetings. Then their texts became private. Then he started saying she understood where the company was going, in a way I did not. I found the hotel receipt in April 2022. 1 room. 2 breakfasts. I did not throw it at him. I placed it in the red ledger book, now old and mostly symbolic, and wrote the date. When I confronted him, he did not deny the affair. He looked almost relieved. Then he said, "We've been over for a long time, Janice." That was news to me. Funny how some men leave a marriage privately before telling the woman still doing payroll. The divorce filing came 3 months later. Richard expected me to be sad, maybe angry, but ultimately manageable. He expected me to accept the house, some retirement funds, maybe a support arrangement, and leave the business alone. He said, "The company is my life's work." I said, "It is also mine." His face changed. There, that was the moment. Not when I found the hotel receipt, not when he moved into a condo, not when Marissa's name appeared on company travel. The true betrayal revealed itself when he realized I intended to claim what I had built. "You were never officially employed," he said. I stared at him. "Officially? You helped because we were married." "I worked because the business required work." "You weren't on payroll." "Because you refused." He leaned back, suddenly cold. "Janice, don't rewrite history." I almost smiled. Richard should have known better. I had been writing history down for 20 years. I hired Helen Park after interviewing 3 attorneys. The first 2 talked mostly about spousal support and house equity. Helen asked about the business within 10 minutes. "What was your role?" she asked. "Operations." "On payroll?" "No." "Documents?" I looked at her. "How much do you want?" She smiled slightly. "All of it." I brought her the first 2 boxes the next day. She called me 48 hours later. "Janice," she said, "your husband is either very arrogant or very forgetful." "Both. This is not a supportive wife file. This is a business partner file." I cried after that call, not because I needed a lawyer to tell me I had worked, because someone finally looked at the paper and said the truth out loud. Discovery began. Richard resisted. He produced limited financials, understated goodwill, claimed the company value depended almost entirely on his personal reputation, described me as administrative support. His attorney used phrases like occasional assistance, spouse support, informal help, unpaid family contribution. Helen read the response and said, "They're trying to make you wallpaper." I said, "I have invoices." "Yes," she said, "wallpaper usually doesn't." We gathered everything: tax returns showing business income supporting the marriage, loan applications listing me as operations manager, emails from vendors granting credit terms after negotiations with me, client contracts drafted by me, insurance audits completed by me, payroll reports under my login, quarterly tax forms transmitted from my email, employee onboarding documents signed by me as company representative, commercial bid packets authored by me, bank correspondence addressed to Richard and Janice Carter, minutes from a chamber event where I was listed as co-owner, photos from early years showing me in the shop office, texts from Richard spanning years. "Can you run payroll? Can you fix bid? Need you at bank meeting. Client angry? Call her. Marissa screwed up contract? Can you correct? Vendor says past due? Handle? Please send W-9. What's our margin on Henderson job? You know this better than me. You know this better than me." That one became my favorite. Helen printed it large enough that I could read it across her office. The divorce dragged for months. Richard's tone changed from dismissive to irritated to openly hostile. He accused me of trying to destroy the company. I reminded him that asking for valuation was not destruction. He said employees would suffer. I said employees had suffered plenty when he underpaid overtime until I corrected it. He said I was bitter because of Marissa. I said Marissa was not relevant to accounts receivable, though she was relevant to his character. Then came court, the hearing where he said I never really worked. Helen let him say it. That was her strategy. "Do not interrupt a man while he is hanging his credibility," she had told me. So I sat there. Richard testified for nearly 40 minutes. He described himself as founder, craftsman, visionary, sole driver of growth. He said I stayed home with the children for many years, which was partly true only if home included the shop office, supplier calls, payroll, tax prep, and a fax machine on our dining room table. He said I had no formal title. He said I was not on payroll. He said I occasionally helped with clerical tasks. Then Helen stood. She walked to the podium with one binder. Only one. That restraint impressed me. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you testified that Mrs. Carter never really worked for Carter Custom Millwork." "That's correct." "Do you recognize this document?" She placed the 2009 bank loan application on the screen. Richard leaned forward. "Yes." "What is it?" "A loan application." "For expansion of Carter Custom Millwork?" "Yes." "Your signature appears on page 8? "Yes." "Please read the highlighted section on page 3. He hesitated. The courtroom was silent. He read, "Janice Carter, co-founder and operations manager, oversees accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, client scheduling, vendor relations, and compliance documentation." Helen tilted her head. "Did I read that correctly?" "Yes." "Was that statement true when you signed it?" Richard shifted. "It was language for the bank." "False language?" "No." "So true language?" His jaw tightened. "It was simplified." Helen smiled politely. "Let's simplify further. In 2009, did Mrs. Carter oversee accounts payable?" "Yes." Accounts receivable? She helped. Payroll? Yes. Client scheduling? Yes. Vendor relations? Sometimes. Compliance documentation? Yes. Helen turned a page. Your testimony today was that she never really worked. Which statement should the court rely on? The sworn testimony you gave today during a divorce, or the signed loan application you submitted to obtain financing? Richard's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Richard's face reddened. I didn't mean she did nothing. Helen nodded. Good, let's discuss what she did. For the next hour, Helen walked him through my life. Email by email, record by record. A 2003 hotel renovation payment dispute resolved by me. A 2006 bank expansion file prepared by me. A 2008 vendor credit agreement negotiated by me. A 2011 accountant memo recommending formal payroll for me because I was performing ongoing operational labor. A 2014 magazine interview preparation email where Richard wrote, Janice has all the history and revenue details. A 2016 commercial bid for Henderson Medical Center, authored by me, resulting in a $480,000 contract. A 2018 insurance audit where I was listed as the primary company contact. A 2020 payroll compliance correction, saving the company from penalties. A 2021 client email saying, Janice, we chose Carter because your proposal was the only one that answered every requirement. A 2022 text from Richard. You know this company better than anyone. Helen paused on that one. Did you send this text to Mrs. Carter? Richard looked exhausted now. Yes. What did you mean? He swallowed. I meant she knew the office side. The office side of an 18-employee company with commercial contracts, payroll, compliance, vendor credit, taxes, and client management. Yes. Helen nodded. So not occasional phone answering. No. The judge made notes. I sat very still. Inside, I was 24 again, at a folding table behind a shop, writing the first invoice. I was 30, holding a baby and a payroll report. I was 38, negotiating lumber pricing. I was 44, rewriting a bid at midnight. I was 50, watching Richard give a speech about his life's work while I checked vendor balances on my phone. I was 55, hearing the record speak. I need to pause here for a second. If you have ever done the work behind the name on the door, you know exactly what that courtroom felt like. It was not about wanting applause. It was about refusing to let someone profit from your labor and then describe you as furniture. If this story is hitting close to home, leave a comment and tell me what proof you kept when someone tried to erase your work. And if you have not already, subscribe to Ultimate Revenge. The quiet part is over. The best witness was not me. It was Miguel Alvarez. He had been our first full-time employee and was still with the company 22 years later. He wore a suit that did not quite fit and looked more nervous than anyone I had ever seen near a table saw. Helen asked, Mr. Alvarez, how long have you worked for Carter Custom Millwork? 22 years. Who hired you? Richard offered me the job. Janice gave me the paperwork and explained pay. Who did employees go to with payroll issues? Janice. Scheduling? Janice. Benefits? Janice. Vendor shortages? Usually Janice. Client change orders? Janice wrote them up. Richard approved design stuff, but Janice made sure we got paid. Richard looked at the table. Helen asked, in your experience, did Mrs. Carter contribute to the growth and operation of the business? Miguel looked at me, then at the judge. With respect, ma'am, if Janice hadn't been there, that shop would have closed by 2005. My throat closed. Richard's attorney tried to challenge him. Mr. Alvarez, you're not a business valuation expert, correct? Miguel said, no, sir, I'm a cabinet maker. So you can't speak to ownership? No, sir, but I know who made sure my paycheck cleared. That was enough. Then came the accountant, George Bell, older now, slower, but still precise. He testified that he had advised formalizing my compensation repeatedly, that my labor had economic value, that the company benefited from unpaid or underdocumented spousal labor, and that my operational role was material to business function. He produced notes from meetings Richard had forgotten existed. One note from 2011 read, discussed Janice payroll issue, RC reluctant. Advised documentation important due to extent of duties. RC. Richard Carter. Reluctant. That word did a lot of work. My own testimony came last. Helen asked me to describe my role. I did not embellish, I did not cry. I described tasks, dates, systems, growth points, contracts, crisis management, employees, banking, compliance. I explained why I was not consistently on payroll. I explained how business funds supported our household. I explained how marital labor and company labor blurred because Richard wanted it that way when it benefited him and separate when it benefited him in divorce. Richard's attorney tried to make me sound bitter. "Mrs. Carter, isn't it true you are angry about your husband's relationship with Ms. Marissa Lane?" "Yes." That startled him, I continued, but my anger about his affair did not create 20 years of payroll reports. A quiet sound moved through the courtroom. The judge looked down, perhaps to hide a smile. His attorney tried again. "You were never listed on the company website as management, were you?" "No." "Never had a formal business card?" "Not after 2012. "Never drew a consistent salary?" "No." "So isn't it possible your role felt larger to you because you were married to Mr. Carter?" I looked at him. No, it felt smaller because I was married to him. Silence. Helen placed a hand over her pen. The attorney blinked. I said, "If I had performed the same labor as a hired operations manager, the company would have paid me, titled me, and replaced me when I left. Because I was his wife, he treated my work as loyalty until I asked for its value. Then he called it nothing." No one spoke for a moment. Then the judge said, "Answer recorded." After the hearing, Richard approached me in the hallway. Helen stepped slightly closer, but I shook my head. He looked older. "Not sorry, older." "You humiliated me," he said. I looked at him. "You testified. You made me look like a liar." "No, I brought documents." His mouth tightened. "You're going to hurt the company. I am going to be paid for my share of it. You don't even care about the shop." That one almost made me laugh. "Richard, I cared about the shop when it was a folding table and 2 invoices." His face changed. For a second, something like memory crossed it. Then pride returned. "You'll never run it without me." "I don't want to run it without you." That surprised him. I continued, "I want the value of what I built." He had no answer. The valuation process took 3 more months. Experts reviewed financials, goodwill, assets, contracts, revenue, and the operational history. Richard's expert tried to tie most company value to his personal skill and relationships. Our expert tied significant value to systems, client retention, commercial processes, vendor credit, employee continuity, and documented operational management. In plain English, he said what I had lived. Richard built cabinets. I built the business that sold, scheduled, billed, insured, financed, collected, and survived them. The court did not give me everything. Court rarely gives anyone everything. But the judge found that Carter Custom Millwork was a marital asset grown substantially during the marriage, that my long-term contributions were significant despite inconsistent payroll documentation, and that Richard's attempt to minimize my role was contradicted by business records. Contradicted, a beautiful word. The settlement ordered a business valuation payout structure. Richard could keep operating the company, but he had to buy out my marital share over time, secured by business assets and life insurance. I received retirement equalization, my share of home equity, and a formal acknowledgement in the findings that I had contributed materially to the business. I cared more about the money than I expected, not because I was greedy, because money is how courts admit time happened. The first payout arrived by wire transfer on a Friday morning. I sat at my kitchen table in the small rental I had moved into after leaving our house. The red ledger book was beside my laptop. My mother's old advice echoed through me. "They praised your father, they paid me." I opened my banking app and saw the deposit. Then I cried, not for Richard, not for the marriage, for the 24-year-old woman at the folding table, for the mother processing payroll after a C-section, for the wife correcting contracts while her husband took applause, for the older woman in court hearing she had never really worked. I wanted to tell all of them. We kept copies. My children handled the truth differently. Lily, now 27, was furious with her father. She had worked summer filing in the office and knew better than anyone how much I had done. She called after the hearing and said, "Dad is delusional if he thinks we didn't see you running everything." Ben, 24, struggled more. He loved his father. He admired the shop. He had worked summers on the floor and saw Richard as the craftsman, the leader, the visible force. For a while, he said things like, "I know you helped, Mom, but Dad did start it." I said, "Yes, and I helped build it." He said, "I know." But he did not know, not fully. Then Miguel took him to lunch. I do not know everything Miguel said. Ben never told me all of it. But after that lunch, Ben came to my apartment with flowers and a folder. Inside were old photos from the shop, me at the folding table, me holding Lily as a baby while writing checks, me standing beside Richard at the 2006 bank groundbreaking, me in the showroom with fabric samples, me at the first employee Christmas party, holding a clipboard and laughing. Ben sat across from me. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" For thinking visible meant more real. That sentence healed something. I touched the photo of myself holding Lily. "Thank you." He nodded. "Dad still says the lawyers twisted things." "I'm sure." But I read the judge's findings. "And?" He smiled sadly. "You worked." Such a small sentence. Such a large repair. The public correction came from a place I did not expect. The local business magazine that had once called me supportive wife reached out after the divorce became known in business circles. A younger reporter, not the one from years ago, wanted to write about family businesses and invisible labor. I almost said no. Then I remembered the article. Craftsman turns garage dream into regional success. I agreed on one condition. "No victim angle," I said. "No bitter ex-wife angle. You write about labor, documentation, and business value." The article came out in September. Headline: "The Work Behind the Workshop, How Undocumented Spousal Labor Shapes Family Businesses." It did not name Richard Crewley. It did not need to. It described my contributions, the court findings, the importance of payroll documentation, and how many spouses, especially wives, perform critical business functions without title, salary, or protection. There was a photo of me this time, not in front of Richard's showroom, at my own desk, with the red ledger book beside me. The article quoted me saying, "If your work keeps the doors open, it deserves a record before the relationship closes." That line traveled. Women emailed me. A florist's wife. A farm wife. A dental office spouse. A contractor's ex. A restaurant owner's widow. A woman who had done bookkeeping for her husband's auto shop for 18 years and had never once received a paycheck. They wrote, "I thought it was just me." It was never just us. Richard hated the article. He sent one email. "Congratulations, you finally got the spotlight." I replied, "No, I got the record corrected." Then I blocked him except for legally required communication. Marissa left the company 8 months after the divorce finalized. I heard she did not enjoy vendor disputes, commercial compliance, or clients who expected emails answered before midnight. Richard hired an actual operations manager after she left. Salary, $96,000 plus benefits. Lily sent me the job posting with no comment. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed so hard, I scared my cat. $96,000 plus benefits. For work I had supposedly never really done. I printed the posting and placed it in the red ledger book. Not because I needed it legally. Because I enjoy a complete ending. 2 years later, my life is quieter. I bought a small townhouse with good light and a room I turned into an office. I do consulting now for small family businesses, especially women who need systems, contracts, payroll structure, and documented roles, before love becomes a liability. My first rule with every client is simple. Put it in writing while you still like each other. Some laugh. I do not. Then they stop laughing and take notes. I still drive past Carter Custom Millwork sometimes. Not often. The sign is still there. Richard's name is still on the door. The business still operates. I do not want it to fail. That may surprise some people, but failure would harm employees who did nothing wrong. It would also dishonor my own work. I did not spend 20 years helping build something just to clap when it burns. I wanted recognition. I wanted value. I wanted the truth. I got enough of all three to live with. The Red Ledger book sits on a shelf in my office now. Its early pages are faded, full of tiny handwritten invoices and notes from a young woman who did not yet understand she was creating evidence. Sometimes I open it and read the first entry. Mrs. Donnelly, bookshelves, deposit received. Our first client. My handwriting, my record, my beginning too. The final lesson is not that every family business is a trap. Some couples build honestly. Some spouses honor each other. Some men put their wives on payroll, on titles, on ownership documents, and in rooms where credit is given properly. The lesson is that love is not documentation. Memory is not compensation. Being married to the owner does not make your labor imaginary. And if someone benefits from your work for 20 years, then tells a judge you never really worked, you do not have to shout. You bring payroll records. You bring tax filings. You bring vendor emails. You bring client contracts. You bring the bank application he signed before he needed you to disappear. My husband told the judge I never worked. I handed over 20 years of payroll records. And when the courtroom finally saw what the office, the employees, the vendors, the bank, the clients, the accountant, and the old Red Ledger had known all along, Richard's story collapsed under the weight of its own signatures. I was not just his supportive wife. I was not a helper. I was not a woman answering phones. I was the person who kept the doors open long enough for him to stand in front of them and call himself self-made. Thank you for staying with me through this story. I know some of you have worked inside marriages, family businesses, farms, shops, restaurants, offices, and homes where your labor was treated like love until you asked for value. If Janice's story reached you, I hope you remembered that work does not become nothing because someone failed to title it. Keep records, keep emails, keep contracts, keep proof. And never let a person who needed your hands tell the world they built everything alone. Subscribe to Ultimate Revenge for more stories about quiet women, family betrayal, silent comebacks, and the documents that finally say what history tried to erase. So tell me, if your husband told a judge you never worked after 20 years of building the family business off the books, would you argue with him? Or would you hand over every payroll record, tax filing, vendor email, and contract with your name on it?